So we've got another wonderful guest with us here at London Climate Action Week, and his name is Gavin Allwright, and you are the Secretary General of the International Windship Association.
Yes, that's correct.
Fantastic. All right. So, Gavin, we haven't met before, virtually, as it were, and we're going to talk about something which I think is extremely exciting. It really is a sort of, for many people, an under-radar sustainable development in the oceans, which could have enormous benefits for humanity, society, and for industry. Tell us what is happening right now with wind-powered shipping.
So we're in a sense we're going back to an energy source that we've used for thousands of years since the Pharaoh's time, and we're seeing this resurgence of wind-propelled vessels. We actually have around 70 large vessels already installed with some form of wind propulsion. So to bring that into a sort of real sense, that's about 4 million tons of cargo can be moved at any given time with a certain percentage of wind. That can be from 5 to 20, 30, 40, and we even have ships that are doing 70, 80% of their load time or their movement time using wind. But we still have a long way to go.
That's amazing, though, because I do remember at the UN Climate Conference in Glasgow, so what, is that 4 years ago now, that there was a lot of excitement in the shipping industry, making commitments to decarbonize their operations, get them off dirty bunker fuel, probably one of the dirtiest fuels in the world. I think it would be hazardous waste if it went to a landfill or a tip. And yet many ships, nearly all the ships in the world, burned that. And they were going to go for decarbonisation, and the word seemed to be hydrogen. It seemed to be they were going to go to this new development in hydrogen. But then sort of quietly under the radar, as I keep saying under the radar, this wind propulsion comes along. And what is, in a sense, driving it? What has ignited this new development in wind shipping?
Well, I'd like to take all the credit myself, but I really can't do that.
You can do that. It's all right.
Well, I can do that. But I think there's quite a number of drivers, but a couple of them are really, really important here. One is that, and your organisation is absolutely aptly named, we don't have time. Wind is globally available. It's available today. It's zero emissions and it's zero cost. So basically, if you're putting these systems onto your ships, you're getting the benefits straight away from lower emissions, but you're also reducing that cost. There's no supply chain. You don't need to mine it, refine it, transport it, bunker it, or store it on board. The energy is delivered at zero cost, zero emissions to the point of use for the lifetime of the ship. And that business model is certainly resonating. Yes, you need upfront investment, but if you actually to lease the systems, for example, you could move that upfront cost over to operational costs. That makes a lot of sense to ship owners. The other point, and probably the other main driver, is around policy and the fact that fossil fuels will be getting more expensive as we start to get carbon pricing coming in. We're already seeing that in the EU. But also other compliance pressures mean that if you're complying with one regulation but you're not complying with another, you're increasing costs again. What wind does is it delivers across the board, broad spectrum, so you're compliant pretty much with every regulation that's in place today and the ones in the pipeline going forward.
And so those policy drivers, as you mentioned, we mentioned earlier that the European Union has a fuel standard for shipping. So people have to meet better, I presume, emission standards or climate standards or whatever it is under this fuel regulation. And that is likely to ratchet up over time. So they can choose to go for some of these synthetic fuels that are being made. I don't know if they come from cooking oil and all kinds of other things. But anyway, mix it with the bunker fuel, get a lower emission or to meet the new standards. Or they can go for wind. That's right. So wind qualifies in a sense.
Yeah, for the Fuel EU Maritime, which is the EU regulation. Wind isn't integrated into that formula, but you get a wind reward factor. So it recognizes it. And that was always a problem, that it only focused on sort of commoditized fuel. So yeah, it's actually quite a challenge to do that. But if you put a large wind system on with that reward factor, you actually you'd be compliant in potentially up to 2035. So that then it ratchets up even further. The new International Maritime Organization formula that's on the table at the moment and has been voted on, but will go for a vote to be adopted in October, that actually looks more at the whole energy use of the vessel rather than just the fuel. And there, wind is actually integrated into the concept. So then you put wind on, you get 15, 20%, 30% of your compliance requirement. Then you're going to get very, very substantially reducing the cost of that. And it's one of the first global carbon prices of any industry as well. So it's going to be quite significant.
Let's just look at some of the designs. I mean, there's a ship called Neo, you can say it better than me.
Oh, the Neoliner.
Neoliner, it's a French-built, I think it was actually built in a port in Turkey, but it's a French-designed ship. It's going to sail this summer, I think August perhaps, from Saint-Nazaire on the west coast of France to Halifax in Canada and then down to Baltimore. I think they're shipping electric Renault cars and some cognac and various other things. Now they're using, I think it's a carbon fiber sail-based wind power system or wind propulsion system, but there are other types of designs as well. Tell us a little bit about those.
Yeah, so we have we sort of demarcate this with wind assist, which is a kind of, if you like, a motor vessel with wind added to it to help reduce the amount of fuel done. And then you have primary wind vessels, which are the Neoliner is one of the examples of that, where the majority of the power is delivered by the wind. So we have there's probably 5 main areas of technology. We have regular standard sails, cloth sails, which most people would be familiar with, but lots of different designs of those using 21st century materials. We have rotating cylinders, which are huge, look like chimneys, but they're rotating. And a lot of people mistake those for generators. They're not. They have a small motor. You rotate the system and it works basically when the wind hits it. It accelerates the wind around one side and decelerates it around the other side. So you get a pressure differential. And actually that's the way that most of these systems work. We have wing sails, which are effectively like an aeroplane wing, which generate huge amounts of lift. You put that into a vertical position, and now you have a wing sail. And these are the things you see in the America's Cup, where these amazing yachts are almost flying out of the water. And those go 3 or 4 times the speed of the wind. So what people have to think of is these technologies are not pushing the ship, they're actually sucking the ship forward or lifting the ship forward. There are kites that are 200-300 meters above the ship, catching almost permanent winds in the strata there. And there are other ones like suction sails, which have a suction device which sucks the wind element around the wing and enhances the lift there.
Amazing, isn't it? I mean, this creativity driven probably in large part by concerns about climate change and trying to find alternative ways of cutting fuel demand. Do you think that that the financial community and others are recognizing the value of this, that there could be more investment? And the second thing is, where's the epicenter of all this happening? Is it Europe or are there other places too?
So on the first point with the finance, yes, I think the finance industry is definitely picking up on this, and quite a bit of finance is coming in now. We're talking, probably in the hundreds of millions at the moment, but we're not seeing the billions yet, and that's a big step change. And I think, in a way, what we need to be seeing is that for financial institutions to stop looking at this as a green investment, but looking at this as an investment. And if you're investing in fossil fuels, then that's actually a dirty, dark, or dangerous investment. This is the new normal. And I think at least the front-running financial institutions are starting to see it that way. And I hope that continues. From an epicenter point of view, a lot of the technology and innovation has been in Europe, some of that coming from the yachting and the racing fraternity. But we're seeing a large growth of interest in Northeast Asia, China, Japan, Korea, and indeed Singapore, where I think that the understanding that this is a real opportunity that's great for the environment, great for business, it's a win-win. We like to say it's a win-win-win situation.
Yes, I can imagine you do. I'm glad one of my colleagues who has a funny noise that he can make on the computer doesn't bring that in right now. So what about the future then? Do you think we're going to see more kinds of designs? I think you're convinced that we'll see a step up in financing for this. At the moment, the ships are generally smaller ships or medium-sized cargo ships, but some of the bigger players with the bigger ships are now looking at this as well, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, those 70 ships that I mentioned, and there's also 130 on order, that spans everything from a small coastal freighter that's primary wind, say at 50, 60 meters length, right up to some of the largest ships in the world. So we have very large ore carriers and oil tankers even that have systems on board, which are 300,000 deadweight tons. So these are 300 meter plus lengths of ships. Container ships, less so at the moment, because you need a little bit of deck space for those, but those designs of those are coming. As we go forward, the projections that we've seen from third parties talk about between 15, possibly up to 20% of the fleet could be outfitted with these systems within the next 5 years, building up to potentially around a half of all ships by 2050 having those. We think that's conservative. We can go much faster. And indeed, we see 2026 next year as a real inflection point. So I think, as many of your viewers will understand, innovation doesn't just happen in a nice linear way. It effectively hits an S-curve. And we're just on the upswing of that S-curve. Policy, finance, and the number of demonstrators will come together pretty much as a perfect storm next year, where we should see exponential growth at that point.
Two quick last questions then. One is, what happens when there was no wind? There's something about funky digitalization and charting systems and satellites and all that kind of thing. So touch on that first. And then I just want to ask you, how the devil did you get into this?
Okay. Well, on the first one, wind. It doesn't blow. What's going to happen? Well, what we have to remember is that any modern wind-powered vessel is a hybrid system. So you're always going to have electric motors or some form of combustion engine on the vessel for maneuvering and for those periods where wind has dropped off. But we're also talking about very much linked in with a lot of 21st century developments. So satellite weather forecasting. We have incredible software that takes 50 years of hind data, meteorological hind data, wave heights, etc. Uses AI and other machine learning to plot out routes which are very, very predictable these days. We even have ships that have put LiDAR onto the vessels, so you can map, if you like, you get a 20 kilometer out from the ship map of where the wind is coming. So you can adjust the vessel to take in, optimize that wind. Mm-hmm. Some systems are also looking at capturing it when you have too much wind. Mm-hmm. And that's always a problem. So when you get too much wind, you're going as fast as the ship will go on the wind. You're having to spill wind, you're having to spill energy. But if you counter-rotated your propellers, for example, on an electric motor, that turns into a generator.
Right.
So you can generate electricity.
Sounds like regenerative braking in a car or something like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And theoretically, you can produce hydrogen on board, store that as a fuel, electricity in batteries, etc., etc. So not quite a perpetual motion machine, but certainly a potential for a new paradigm of shipping.
So being in the doldrums, which was always the phrase about the old sailing ships, maybe a phrase that it comes, in the past. And
Well, I'm sure the doldrums will still be there, but the ship doesn't have to be stuck there. So,
yeah, right.
yes, absolutely.
And lastly, how did you get into this, Gavin? Because it's a really new nugget in a sense. I know it's got a background, but there's a journey here of yourself as much as in the theme that we're talking about.
And I think my wife has asked me this question quite a few times.
And she's still not got the right answer.
Yeah, probably not. Well, I was the founding Secretary General along with sort of 12 pioneers in the sector. But I'd been working for the previous 7 or 8 years with a small NGO that was developing open source designs for wind and solar powered trading ships in the least developed countries. And indeed my master's degree was on the logistics and the potential for effectively unplugging the whole of the South Pacific, which is 10 to 15% of our land mass, is that water span, with a lot of small island developing states, and saying, effectively, we could do this without the use of fossil fuel or very, very limited amount. So I actually came into shipping from a sustainable development perspective, and that was really one of the reasons why all of the pioneers turned around and said, well, would you be the Secretary General because you don't have a particular project or you don't have a favorite technology there. So we're able to stay technology neutral, energy neutral, but also look not just at Western, the global North, business focus here, but also looking at the global South and how these technologies can be implemented for the good of those.
Yeah, because it could be really fantastic for small and developing states and things like that, this technology, not just for the big shipping, the Maersks and the Hapag Lloyds and everybody else, but,
Absolutely.
It's funny, because I think I was the first person to go across the English Channel when I was a journalist on the Times newspaper on a solar-powered boat that went from Dover, roughly, to Calais. And I remember arriving in Calais and calling the news desk of the Times and from a payphone, actually, and saying, so I'll be back in the office sometime later tomorrow. And they said, why can't you be back this evening? And I said, it's a solar-powered boat. And they said, oh, right, yeah, don't go when the sun's not shining. I went, yes. Of course, that's all changed. They would have battery storage. But, Gavin, thank you very much indeed. This is a really glimpse into a very huge and very fascinating topic. It's really interesting. You're doing a great job, and you articulate the story very well, because for a lot of people, like, what, but it really is something that's happening that I think many people don't know about, and that is so emblematic of what We Don't Have Time is about, which is to reveal and inform people around the world about new creativity. We haven't lost climate change. We can do it. There's all kinds of stuff coming through, and this is yet another example. So thank you very much indeed.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
So we have another wonderful guest with us here at London Climate Action Week, coming live from Daz Box in the heart, in the centre, almost of the financial district here in London. If you could say who you are and where you're from, please.
Yeah, hi Nick, I'm Gabrielle Ginér. I'm head of environmental sustainability for BT Group.
Okay, it's great to see you again, because it's not the first time we've been together on
No, it's fantastic to be here and with the team from We Don't Have Time again.
Okay, thank you so much. The BT Group has recently published a climate transition plan. Could you tell us a bit more about what that is and why it's so important that companies like yourselves develop these transition plans?
Yeah, a climate transition plan is a time-bound plan for our stakeholders, like investors and like customers, to talk about our roadmap and the actions that we are taking to get to net zero. What we found was that a lot of companies were setting net zero targets, but they weren't really reporting on the progress they were making or what it would actually take to get to net zero. And these plans also look at the challenges and dependencies that companies have. And I think that's so important. We do need to highlight those challenges, because if we don't share what those are, how are we going to collaborate to overcome them? And I think climate transition plans, it's also a way to bring people from across the company together to say, okay, what does this mean? It's an opportunity to communicate with the board around the roadmap and what we are going to do, and something for the company to rally behind.
I really like that, I really like it so much, because we often have people on the shows and then you think, what are they up to? Like 2 years later, you feel like, I don't know. And then, you have these bad winds blowing sometimes where you think maybe everything's running off course. And you think, well, maybe all the companies are hiding in their burrows, and we need them right now more than ever before to stand up. And then, with the transition plan, you have the clear thing and you can communicate it many, many times. That's really, really cool. In the transition plan, you mentioned that 80% of the BT Group's emissions come from your suppliers. And how are you tackling this challenge to reach your decarbonisation goals? And also illuminate what is a supplier, right? Because for ordinary people are going, suppliers, what does that mean, So tell us the kind of suppliers you have, and how are they tackling this challenge? Yeah,
so those are the companies that we buy stuff from. So, for example, our mobile operator is called EE. So we sell to consumers, we sell phones. So a supplier to us is Apple or Samsung, for example, or it's the people that give us the network connectivity, so an Ericsson or a Nokia, that help us build that network. So it's the stuff that we buy, from pencils to mobile phone masts, right? And so we are taking action by ourselves. So we have adjudication criteria linked to sustainability performance. We're also asking for suppliers to set these net zero targets, to disclose their climate performance to CDP. But what we've found actually is really working is a contract clause around sustainability. So when our commercial teams are negotiating the contract, they put in a clause that requires the suppliers to reduce their carbon footprint over the term of the contract. And that's then reviewed on a quarterly basis. So you can imagine when I talk to a supplier, it's like, oh, well, that's nice, that's Gabrielle about sustainability, and I talk to sustainability people, right? But when you're in that buyer and seller conversation, it has a lot more teeth. So that's so much more effective. But I think what really matters when we deal with suppliers is, one, to show that as a company, you care and that you're gonna follow up. So this is not just a one-off and then we're going to forget about it. So you're going to be there, you're going to follow up. But also that you're going to work with the supplier on training and developing their skills. So, they might not know what a carbon footprint is, or they might not know what they're supposed to be doing. And we can help with our expertise. We can help them with that. So I think that's really important, that collaboration and the learning. And then we also work with others. So we work with Exponential Roadmap Initiative. We work with 1.5 supply chain leaders and other big brands to share best practice on how we engage with suppliers. And we work with our trade associations. So we're a member of something called the Joint Alliance for CSR that brings together 30 or so of the world's largest telcos. So it's us and Vodafone, Telefonica, AT&T. And we come together and set expectations for suppliers around sustainability and circularity. So what that means is that the supplier doesn't have 30 different requirements. It's actually, we as an industry are expecting you to do that. And that makes it easier for them, and it also makes it easier for us. I think that what we've found, the real lever here is your purchasing power. So if the expectation is not just from BT, but it's from the whole of the industry, that works so much better. And so are the benefits. So yes, my favorite example, which is around Ericsson and how we worked with Ericsson to look at carbon reduction activities for them. So they switched one of their factories in Poland to renewable electricity. That meant a lower carbon footprint for what we as BT were buying. That is great. But it also meant a lower carbon footprint for all our competitors also buying from Ericsson. So it has this much bigger effect, and I think that's what we need to see. If we work with different suppliers, maybe this can help the rest of us in the industry.
And it also, of course, helps Poland meet its emission reduction targets.
Exactly.
Which sometimes people forget. It's an ecosystem, right? It's not just you and the suppliers, but then there's a country that's part of the EU. The EU has targets and Poland has to meet some. And so it helps them, right? So it's actually a virtual circle, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The transition plan also outlines some key dependencies for your climate action journey. I'm trying to work out what a key dependency is, but anyway, you'll probably explain.
It's like the enabling environment. So
Okay, so one such enabling environment, one such dependency, is being able to transition to electric vehicles. What have you done there, and what have you done to try and drive this systemic change?
Yeah, so a dependency here. If you think an electric vehicle, you need to be able to charge it. Where's the charging infrastructure? You need to be able to buy the vehicles. You need at the moment, some fiscal incentive around that. So what we did is we joined forces with the climate group and then invited other fleet operators to come together with us to advocate again with a common voice to policymakers saying, if we're going to transition to EVs, the dependencies or the environment that we need is a country where you can charge your EV. And I think companies coming together like that also sends a demand signal to the suppliers, like, we are actually going there. We're gonna transition to EVs, and that's so important. I mean, we've seen it on renewables, right? All these companies came together and said, we are now switching to renewables.
It's so funny with electric vehicles, because when I'm back in Britain, I have friends of mine saying, I don't know, I think it's too soon for all this and things. And then you actually look at the graphs, and pretty much everywhere, the number of electric vehicles is going up and up and up and up. It's not like some novelty that's just sort of coming in and everyone's not too sure about it. But, it's quite funny when you hear people saying, I'm not sure if it's going to catch on, It
is catching on.
It was the same when Britain went metric. I'm old enough to remember there were some shops where they went, well, we're not really bothering with that because it's not going to catch on,
Exactly.
Sounds like Britain. Anyway, do you know how many vehicles you actually have?
5,000. So
right.
We have the UK's second largest fleet. We've got 30,000 vehicles, and we've converted 5,000 of those.
Yeah, okay, that's super. Okay, I'm sure our viewers would love to see more climate transition plans from other companies across the world. I certainly would. What was BT Group's experience with making this transition plan, and are there any learnings or challenges that came from that?
I think initially it's what are you going to focus on? So we started out by getting all of this information, and there was so much, and we thought, oh my God, this is too much, So actually my learning is to start from the end point. We had to figure out what is the structure, what's going to be in it, what's important, and then put the information into a format like that. I think that was one of the key learnings. I think another one is around timing. Are there other things happening? Are we depending on something, that's happening in the business? So what's a good timing to publicize this to get max kind of comms and publicity around it? And I think it was just a great opportunity to engage with the company and to engage around something and to remind everybody that we are still working on this net zero targets, and here's what it's going to take.
I suppose you must have had some benefit from doing science-based targets that got you kind of on the road a bit, yeah?
Yeah, that sets the pathway.
Yeah.
That sets the pathway.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it's not like you're starting from ground zero.
No, but you just need to fit, into this kind of like format and how do you present the actions. And I think we struggled a bit with that initially, and it was just figuring out how is it all going to fit together.
Of course, next time you do it, you'll be using ChatGPT.
Yeah, I know, right?
I hope not. Were there any learnings from it? Were there any challenges? Were there things that you were surprised by? Or did you feel, were there parts of the transition plan went, we haven't really thought about that as much as we could do, or, that's revealing, we forgot about that, or, I don't know.
I think the focus is really important, and I think also everything takes longer than you expect it to, right?
Yeah.
So you think, it's going to be done, in a couple of months. It took a lot longer than that. And I think also taking into account the process of engaging people and getting that sign-off is really important.
And also, one forgets that in a company, you've got new employees all the time. You've got new people in the system and things like that. They may not have been around when one did the original science-based targets, for example. And so they are learning something as well.
So it's that whole education, and sometimes you have to start over from the beginning.
You might get a new chairman and you might get a new CEO, and it's like, I think they need to know about the transition plan. This is how we did it, so what is BT Group's plans going forward? Where do you go from here in your climate transition journey?
Yeah, so I think this was just a key step for us, really, on the road to net zero. So really important, but there's still so much to do. There's so much to do around transitioning our fleet and continuing to advocate for those policies that we need, and the supply chain. I think we're going to talk more about that tomorrow. We all have challenges around decarbonizing our supply chain, and that's really where we need to see that exponential change. And we need to learn from each other. We need to continue, I think, to work with suppliers and see what has worked and what has not.
Interesting. So I think it's very interesting that you put a clause in the contracts. That's really saying, we take this seriously, so our suppliers, you must take it seriously too. And climate change is a serious topic. Yeah, so that's amazing. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Nick.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Will do.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
So we have another wonderful guest with us here at London Climate Action Week, very close to the City of London and the very strong financial district that they have here in the UK. So if you could say who you are and where you're from.
Hi, my name's McKee. I lead Carrot. We are a platform for the circular economy, and we are global. We are based in the US. In Brazil, our projects are based in Brazil, and we also have some participation in Europe as well. Okay,
how very interesting. I hadn't heard of Carrot before, and I think probably some of our viewers have not heard of Carrot. So just tell me, what are you trying to do? From what I understand, it's trying to drive real progress on climate and waste. In other words, dealing with climate and dealing with waste. Yeah.
That's right, yeah. So the next great opportunity that we see for global decarbonization in general is to be able to better utilize the resources that we have. So the global economy today is very inefficient. We're about 7% circular globally. And to give you an idea, if we just doubled our circularity rate, we could address 85% of the greenhouse gas emissions reductions that we need to stay below 2 degrees Celsius. So even when we look at the energy transition or even carbon removal, these are usually solutions that are going to take 20 to 50 years to drive real big impact. And the circular economy is something that we can address today.
So I suppose the circular economy in very much is it's an economy in which nothing is wasted, right? Everything goes around. If you design things, then they're meant to be recyclable, reusable, blah, blah, blah. And that all the flows and materials that come from industries and maybe even households can go back into doing something useful rather than being dumped. I mean, that's the principle basically of the
Exactly, yeah. So we are consuming resources at 2.5 times our biocapacity. Mm-hmm. What that means is that we would need 2.5 planets to be able to address our current consumption needs. Mm-hmm. But if we reuse and recycle our materials and we keep materials in the production and use process longer, we consume fewer resources. And by doing that, we're also reducing emissions because we no longer need to extract raw materials, haul, and process every time we produce and use something. Mm-hmm. And that offers incredible opportunities for decarbonization, as well as addressing the methane emissions problem that we have at landfills, which is very significant.
Very significant. So give me a concrete example of what you're doing or what you're planning to do in terms of circularity. You mentioned Brazil.
Sure.
Is there a project that is emblematic of what you're up to?
Absolutely. So 45 to 50% of global waste is organic waste. And all of this waste today ends up in a landfill where it ends up generating methane emissions, which is a potent greenhouse gas, which we need to address immediately. So what we've done is we've built the first fully digital native carbon credit from food waste diversion from a landfill to a composting facility. And then when we sell these credits, we're distributing the rewards generated from those credits to all the supply chain participants. And by doing that, we're changing the economics of recycling. So the idea here is that all this food waste that today is ending up in a landfill can actually go to a compost facility and then generate the compost that we need to regenerate our soils. So we're covering the cost gap of getting that food waste to a proper biological treatment site.
That's very interesting because we don't have time. We're very interested in methane being, a super pollutant. I think some of our audience now have heard maybe many more times than they wish to hear that it's 80 times more heating than carbon dioxide, and yet lives in the atmosphere for maybe 12 years, maybe less, maybe more, but, a very short-lived climate pollutant. And I was making a show in Brasilia just a few weeks ago with the United Nations Environment Programme's Climate and Clean Air Coalition, and we went to a waste picker cooperative on the edges of Brasilia, and they were actually separating everything but the organic waste. And they said, we just don't have an incentive to separate this organic waste, but we would like to.
Sure.
And so this fits in really very much with what you're saying. It's a supply chain from the city right through to the people on the ground, yeah? Yeah,
because today in most places around the world, you're mixing food waste or organic waste with recyclables, and then you're destroying all the value that exists in recyclables. Mm-hmm. So most of this dirty, let's say, recyclable material, when it ends up at a cooperative, they won't clean it because it's not worth, there's no money, and there's not enough time, money, and it's really not sanitary to be able to be working with cleaning these resources. So by sorting the organic waste from the start, there's the circular economy is actually 2 cycles. If you've ever seen the butterfly diagram from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, you'll see that there's the biological cycle and then there's the technical cycle, and they should never mix. So our priority globally is to be able to sort these waste materials all over the world as quickly as possible. And this methane credit that we've developed from food waste composting is to do that, is to cover the cost of sorting food waste and making sure that it goes through a proper biological cycle, and it adds value to the entire supply chain. All the participants benefit from that.
So you're at an interesting time for doing this because I think there is a real appetite around the world for attacking methane, and many governments have now signed up to the Global Methane Pledge. Mm-hmm. Again, from being Brazilian myself and talking with the city of Rio de Janeiro and others, there seems to be something that they want to do for the next UN climate conference, COP30 in Brazil, in Belém. And Latin America has, everyone's got a serious problem with methane, but Latin America has a particular problem with waste, the waste chains and the landfills on this topic. So have you started the project already?
Yes.
Whereabouts in Brazil is it happening? And where do you go next? And why are people just not knocking on your door right now? Or maybe they are to do more of these?
Well, we're at go-to-market phase. So we're introducing what we believe is the highest value environmental asset in the world. And like I said, the transition to a circular economy has to start somewhere, and that's sorting organic waste from other waste materials. And so we're working with the largest and best industrial-sized composting facilities in Brazil today. And we already have, 60,000 tons worth of credits to sell. And the idea here is really to showcase to the world and make COP30 more than just about the Amazon forest and say, hey, listen, let's really think about something that's going to cause systemic change. And the circular economy is that next evolution of our battle with climate. We've talked about the energy transition. Everybody knows about that. We know we need to do better with our forests. But what can we really do to drive change in a meaningful way? And the circular economy is what we hope to put on the agenda for COP30.
So Anna Toni, the CEO of COP30 in Brazil, I did interview her just recently, and I did ask, what new financial ideas have you got to move the world forward in terms of climate change? She mentioned some, which is a tax on maybe high earners, and also they're talking about taxes on long-haul flights, a small cost on long-haul flight, which could be used and deployed in other ways. But she did say carbon markets.
Sure.
And we know the rule book is completed for the Paris Climate Agreement on that. So this could be, especially with methane and the interests of Brazil in the methane story and the waste story, plus their interest in carbon credits, this could be a very big moment for what you're doing.
I think there are a bunch of factors here. It's very difficult for government to be able to tackle waste management at scale. So a piece of it needs to be decentralized, and we need to bring in new capital. So, government doesn't have really at scale either the financial resources, human capital, or the technology that's needed. So by bringing in new capital and demonstrating, landing essentially the carbon market on top of the circular economy and valuing, decarbonization through circularity, now all of a sudden you have a very efficient and good way to have the private sector essentially fund the transition. And so from a regulatory perspective, you have programs called extended producer responsibility, which is essentially the role of a private company to be able to address or support financially, let's say their waste reduction and decarbonization efforts in a very good way. So Brazil has advanced extended producer responsibility legislation in place, and because the regulated carbon market in Brazil is coming within the next 3 years, everybody is seeing the circular economy as a great opportunity for this, and we hope to be able to show a great example of that going forward. And the challenges that we see, for example, in a developing country like Brazil, a mid-development country, are the same challenges we see in underdeveloped countries as well as the developed nations. I mean, even in Europe and obviously the US, we have a lot of work to do in this space, and we think that this is the first step.
Yeah. And if I was somebody that wished to buy carbon credit, methane credits, who do I contact?
You can contact us at Carrot. Yeah,
Carrot.
We believe, again, we have high quality, high integrity, immediate impact, systemic change product through methane that can deliver results today.
Yeah.
And that's the real difference, I think. And again, I think the key differential here is that the purchase of the credits, these methane credits that we're talking about, you can track the money going across the supply chains. So you're investing in the infrastructure that we need for sorting organic waste, hauling it, composting it. You're also changing the economics of the market, because now a waste generator who would have to contract for composting services, now they're getting a cash back on it, and it's making it more competitive with landfilling. Because that's the problem. The problem is it's more expensive to compost, for example, than it is to landfill.
Away. Yeah, exactly. That's always the problem, and if you can change that dynamic, that's really good. And if it can get down to some of those poor people as well, picking the waste out of that mess that I saw on the edge of Brazil, that would be absolutely wonderful,
Yeah, Brazil has the second largest picker workforce in the world, and on a per capita basis, it's the #1 in the world. And if it's all mixed up with food waste in there, you can imagine how horrible it is.
I've got it. And it's carrot.com or carrot?
Carrot.eco.
Carrot.eco. All right. So people should be going rushing to that right now after they see this this broadcast. Well,
I hope so.
Thank you very much, Ian. And I love the name because there is carrot and stick. Yeah. And this is carrot to encourage people. And of course, carrots can end up in the waste stream and they need to be separated as well.
Absolutely. We need incentives to be able to change the system and to change behavior as well. And our hope in the distant future is that we won't even need carrots in the future. Once everything changes, the infrastructure is in place, everybody understands the importance of this, then there's really, it's a new system that's a low carbon, sustainable, inclusive future. That's what we want to build.
Okay. Thanks very much for being with We Don't Have Time.
Thank you.
Right. So, Robert, before it's lovely to see you again. Could you give me your full title and who you represent?
Hi Nick, hello London, hello everyone watching. This is Robert Sabelström. I'm the founder of Climate Hero, an impact startup that is tackling climate change mainly from the consumption and behavioral perspective.
That's great. And so welcome to London Climate Action Week and welcome to the live show of We Don't Have Time. Climate Hero started with a very clear vision to mobilize households in the fight against climate change. Can you walk through the journey since you launched back in 2018 and give us some idea of the impact that you've had?
Sure, thanks for asking. So we launched the first version of Climate Hero Carbon Calculator for households back in spring 2018. And looking back, I would say it was kind of an instant success. We got really good feedback from our users. They liked the tonality, the friendly English in the eye tonality we used instead of alarmism. They really liked how quickly and simple it was to calculate and reflect on their carbon footprint. And they really liked how forward-looking we were, asking for feedback and giving, nudging them to do pledges on how you can reduce your carbon footprint. Back then, 2018, it was just launched in my home market here in Sweden, calling in from Stockholm right now. And it took around a year to see if this could be something bigger than just, a side project to do an impact as a father. But thanks to all the great feedback we got from our users, we did more than 1,000 tweaks, changing it. And then eventually we started like a really exponential growth journey. So since 2018, we've been more or less doubling our user base every year. It took us 3 years to reach 100,000 households, another 3 years to pass 1 million, and of course expanding into different markets and languages. So as this is being broadcasted, we just passed 1.8 million households that have used Climate Hero.
Wow.
And we are available in English, Spanish, German, Italian, French, and Portuguese.
That's amazing, Robert. And it's so cool that you've got Portuguese because, of course, the next climate conference is taking place in Brazil. And maybe we can, Climate Hero is going to be something that's going to engage the public there increasingly as a legacy of that COP. So let's go to this issue of social tipping points, Robert. I mean, how can we mobilize a global population to drive change? Can you explain how this works?
So, you need to consider how many people do we need to mobilize to actually move the needle. And I can say, yeah, I'm really proud that we have mobilized 1.8 million households. But of course, that's a very small share of the global population still. But if you dwell down on the data, you can also look at where does the emissions come from. And there are different perspectives of this, of course. What you discuss at the COP, you will look at the territorial emissions that different countries, so to say, are accountable for. But you can also consider emissions from a consumption perspective, meaning if I buy something today, if I buy a hamburger or a new iPhone, even if I buy it in Sweden, the emission might have occurred in a different country. It's been imported. So if you look at emissions from that perspective, you can actually see that the emissions are extremely unevenly distributed. In fact, just 50% of all emissions originate from just 10% of the global population. And that's, of course, the richest, so to say, 10%. But don't think of of millionaires and so. That's not only the case. In fact, everybody who lives in Europe, North America, what we like to call the global north, that has a job, a home, and can afford a vacation, actually belongs to this group of this 10%. And that's only like 800 million people. But you don't need to affect all these 800 million people to move the needle, because that is what the behavioral science shows around social tipping points. It's about norm shift. Mm-hmm. It's meaning that if you can affect around a quarter of a population, so around 25%, that becomes a new norm. And that's what you see happening, for instance, to vegetarian food, or that you can commute to work via bike or e-bike and so. It doesn't need to be everybody at your work that starts to become, full-fledged plant-based vegetarians. But instead, if enough people do it, it shifts the norm. So it becomes more like of course there's going to be vegetarian options on the menu. Of course you can have a company event with vegetarian as the first option, kind of. Mm-hmm. And if you look at those 25% out of 800 million, we're down to 200 million people. And then in this group, most people live in families. It's an average of 2.1 people per family. So then we're down to 100 million households. And that can kind of be in reach. I mean, we've helped to mobilize 1.8 million, and we're not the only one. I mean, this is an ecosystem. This is something we can do together. And that gives me hope.
Yeah. Good. So you've recently launched something called Educate for Impact as the next phase of your work. What is that, and how can companies play a role in this?
So far, the focus of companies have mainly been to consider their own emissions. There has been regulatory demands, for instance, to report on your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And there are lots of companies that take efforts beyond that and help with the climate transition. But one thing that is often forgotten is the HR perspective. Because, I mean, each company has lots of employees, and they are individuals that can be part of this movement as well. So the Educate for Impact initiative is that we are trying to cooperate more with the large organizations to look at their communities where they have an effect. So number 1 community can be their employees. Number 2 community can be around if you're a B2C company, for instance, that you have customers or other stakeholders which you can engage. So this is really a call to action. Don't forget that you have this influence if you are a large company or organization.
Got you. So let's just have a few little more points on this. Are there certain companies that you want to be in the Educate for Impact, or is it open to all, or are there certain key areas that you're looking at?
Everybody is welcome, because, I mean, we all need to chip in. So this initiative is really how can you educate your employees or your customers to take these climate steps. Then, of course, if you look at what can make most impact, if you are a company which have large communities, either a lot of employees or a lot of households as your customers, then yes, with a little nudge and inspiration to make them to also calculate and reflect on their carbon footprint and get these friendly nudges as we as Climate Hero can provide, that can make a huge impact. And that will make us come closer to this social tipping point of 100 million. And on top of that, it will synergize. Because if you get your workforce, for instance, you can have a local social tipping point at your workforce. It will be much easier to get the buy-in on the carbon reduction journey of the company if you have similar reduction targets, if your whole workforce is mobilized and have reflected not only on their commuting to work, but also on their lifestyle emissions.
Yeah. Good. So if people want to know about Educate for Impact, they can go to your website, Robert?
Yes, please reach out. climatehero.org is our website. And if you want to test the concept, you can do that. If you're watching this via the We Don't Have Time app, you can go to your profile picture in the We Don't Have Time. And below, you will either see a little link saying calculate your carbon footprint. Once it's done, the result gets reconnected to your profile page. If you already done the calculation, you can see it there. So that's a way. This is the We Don't Have Time example, but it could be any company doing a similar way. And on top of that, it's not only the reflection on what you as an individual contributed. We can look at what the total community following that link has been doing. Okay, good.
And I've got here in my outro, I've got this phrase, power up to empower your community and beyond, catalyze sustainable habits, shape the norm. Is that a kind of message that you would like to share too?
Yes, I mean, we can measure direct impact, saying we have helped 1.8 million households to calculate their carbon footprint. And the collective pledge of those 1.8 million households is to reduce carbon emissions with 3.5 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalents per year. That's the same as if we would instantly remove over 2 million diesel cars from our roads. But of course, that is just the direct impact. The real thing is to drive this shift of consumption, the norm shift. And if we together in an ecosystem can influence 100 million households, this can be the tipping point that actually helps us do this first halving.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Well, great work, Robert. You're doing great work at Climate Hero, and best of luck with this new initiative. And let's hit that 100 million very soon.
Thank you.
So we're here at London Climate Action Week with another fantastic 3 guests. I'm going to ask who they are and where they're from.
Hi, I'm Valerie Langer. I'm with Canopy, and I'm from Vancouver in Canada.
I'm Marenzi from the Future Fabrics Expo, where we are right now.
I'm Lakshmi Poti from Laudes Foundation.
Thank you very much indeed. It's an marvelous that we have here. From what I understand, we're showcasing sustainably produced materials and solutions for transforming the textile and the fashion sectors, with over 10,000 materials and textiles on display and a growing innovation hub, a focus on education. It's kind of trying to lead the charge on sustainability solutions for this sector. Nina, can I start with you first? It's something of a milestone for you, I think, because this is the 14th year that you've been doing this. When you're looking back on this, and when you're looking back on the sustainable angle, which is, I think, your company that launched this expo, what has changed?
Right, thank you. So the sustainable angle is actually turning 15 right now, because that is the not-for-profit organization that I set up in 2010. But you're right, it is 14 years since we've done the Future Fabrics Expo. So first came the not-for-profit, which is absolutely supporting educational output at the Future Fabrics Expo. And so back in 2010, it was all about raising awareness of the problems that stem from the fashion and textiles industries and the lack of communication of the solutions that existed. And the year later, that was when the Future Fabrics Expo came together. And we will celebrate that next year, the 15th. So right now we're celebrating the sustainable angle, which is being supported by partners like the Laudes Foundation, as well as Canopy. And the Future Fabrics Expo is now a showcase for sourcing sustainable textile solutions and innovations.
Maybe I come to the Laudes Foundation. You are a foundation by definition, and you clearly fund certain things around the world that you feel as a foundation are important. Why did you get involved in this activity here?
Yeah, sure. I think there's a unique role for philanthropy in bringing together unlikely alliances and demonstrating what is possible. In this kind of a decisive decade of action, we need all hands on deck. And that's really the work that Laudes Foundation does, bringing people together, showcasing what's possible through forums like the Future Fabrics Expo, and then working with partners like Canopy and Fashion for Good to see how you can scale this even more into supply chains.
Now, we were talking a little bit earlier, you're a bit passionate about wood as being a solution to this. How can you make fabrics out of wood?
Well, what Canopy does is actually save forests. So there are a class of textiles called man-made cellulosic fibers, and about 300 million trees a year are cut in order to make textiles. And about half of those trees are coming from ancient and endangered forests that should not actually be logged and actually should be part of the protected areas network of the world that we're trying to achieve by 2030. And many forests should be restored. So how do you do that? Well, there are basically man-made cellulosic textiles are made out of cellulose, which is in every plant, from grass in your lawn to the flowers in the flower shop to the straw that's growing and left after the grain harvest, as well as in wood fiber. So we're looking at diversifying the fiber basket for man-made cellulosic textiles by helping the innovators, the investors, and the suppliers to the fashion brands to figure out how we get commodities made from something other than trees into the fashion supply chain.
So is it, just to make this clear, it's about, is it using waste agricultural materials in some cases? And is it about sustainably managing forest plantations to produce what you need? How can you characterize this?
Right. Well, if you think about cellulose, which most people would never do, except a few geeks in the world, like myself, you would know that it's available in old cotton t-shirts, old jeans, or the residue left after the grain harvest, or the barley harvest, for example. So you take something that is currently considered a waste, your old t-shirts, your old jeans, and a new technology that can extract the cellulose that's inherent in that and use that as a resource instead of thinking of it as a waste. And so allow trees to grow for the centuries that they can to bring the carbon out of the atmosphere so that it helps climate change, allow species to have the habitat like orangutans and caribou, and provide a solution that is both good for forests, good for species, good for climate, and good for the fashion industry, that rather than using high carbon, high biodiversity value materials can switch to something that is currently considered a pollutant or a waste.
Maybe, Nina, you could, just for the audience, just frame a little bit. I mean, what is the problem with the existing way that we, make fabrics, the way we use fabrics, the way the fashion industry has got quite fast in terms of what it does? Just give us a glimpse into that.
Yeah. And so one of the main starting points for the Future Fabrics Expo was to really, first of all, make people aware of that they're mainly using the same fibers. So about 60% is synthetic, that's plastic. And then about 23% is conventional cotton. And then there's also MMCFs that Valerie just mentioned, that's between 8 and 10%. Yeah. And then there's a lot of other fibers like wool and so on. And what we want to do at the Future Fabrics Expo, really offer alternatives for those very polluting materials and fibers initially, such as the polyesters, the synthetics that we all know, and conventional cotton. And certain ways to do that is through more sustainable farming methods, or whether you have non-synthetic dyes, you have different very funky new colorization technologies that we're showing at the Future Fabrics Expo, for example. There's all sorts of ways where it can lower the environmental impact. Or with synthetics, of course, what are the alternatives to synthetics? Can you, for example, have blends with other fibers that deliver similar performance but are not reliant on petrochemicals? Or finishing agents are usually, that's what comes at the very end of the production of materials, so after the dyes have been applied, etc. They are usually completely made from fossil fuel-based materials, chemistry, basically. And so what we want to do is have green chemistry, non-toxic ingredients that are not costing the planet, quite simply. And that was the starting point for the Future Fabrics Expo. So we have a huge amount of materials that can be better alternatives for those main categories of polluting fibers that we're currently using.
Yeah, I remember somebody once telling me you could tell what the color of the clothes, what the color of the year is by looking at the color of the rivers in China in terms of the dyes. Yeah, and so the dyes that we're using. From a financial point of view, I mean, you're essentially kickstarting something. At some moment, if it's going to go mainstream, then maybe the big textile manufacturers or the big fashion houses have to start saying, okay, this is a business model we can work with. This is a real guesstimate, but are we anywhere near that moment?
This is a trick question. I think the hope and the desire for all of us is to get there soon enough. 2030 is actually, a lot of brands have ambitious targets to get circular materials and better materials into their fiber basket. So we're hoping that we can get there, but that's going to take all of us to do our work. So it's going to require policy that supports this world over. It's going to require suppliers down the supply chain to be equipped to take on and connect with all of these technologies. I think the work that's been done over the last years that's helped is actually to demonstrate that these are viable technology. So when I walk in here today at Future Fabrics Expo and I look at actually full garments out there in collections that you can see and touch and feel, you know that this is possible. So this has been, fabric that's gone into making clothing. We just need to get it out there into all the stores around the world, and that's going to require concerted effort and at a pace and scale that we've never seen before. So we're going to have investors who need to put their money in. We're going to need suppliers to work on changing up their operations. And more importantly, we're going to need brands to actually support and collaborate and co-create with these suppliers so that the people in the supply chain are also taken along. So that's an ambitious dream, but I'm hopeful. I'm an optimist. So,
a quick question just on, so there seems to be a balance here between using regenerative agriculture, harvesting waste from the agricultural sector and repurposing it to produce fabrics, textiles. Mm-hmm. And then you mentioned, obviously, technology. So there's technology in here somewhere as well, because they have to do funky things with these waste materials, right, to make something that people want to buy. Who wants to pick up on that? Is that part of the story?
Yeah. Well, the majority of the fabrics that we wear and the clothes we wear are actually a blend of materials. You might have a cotton shirt and polyester thread, or you might have a blend with elastane in your jeans. So we have these kind of complex materials that become waste. So of the 90 million garments that are going to be made, 60% of them are going to be in the garbage by 1 year out. And unless you kind of harvest them, but in order to harvest them and use them as a resource, you have to separate each of the blended materials from each other, and that takes a technology. And also, if you're wanting to do something that isn't plastic, that doesn't use fossil fuels as its input, you don't want to use high carbon wood, then you actually have to figure out how to take an alternative material and turn it into something that looks and feels kind of like what everybody's used to. You know, we wear clothes because we love the way we look, and we're very used to the way that certain things drape or feel, and it's very difficult to introduce a brand new material onto the market. So this is not just about technology. It's about technology, about the feel, and about how it integrates into an incredibly well-established system, which has thousands and thousands and thousands of weavers, spinners, dyers who have to be able to take that new material and turn it into red and blue and white and all the colors. The dye has to work. It has to work on the spinning machine. So it's technology not just at one point, but all the way along a long supply chain. And this is where it takes a fashion village. It's not just all on the brands. Brands don't make thread. Brands design garments and pull them through. The thread has to work, the dye has to work, etc. So this is where we're working with, across our nonprofit and philanthropic and for-profit investor sectors to create the conditions where everybody becomes part of the solution. It's not all on one entity's shoulders. And that's really where it all comes down to, the collaboration and consortium work.
One thing I wanted to add to your question before, actually, which I didn't finish completely answering, is the opportunities that we're creating from a materials perspective. So a lot of new materials actually deliver way above just being an alternative to something. So whether you're looking at, let's say, an alternative to leather, right? Which used to be mainly having maybe 15, 20, up to 50% plastic in it. That's not necessarily really a clever replacement for, let's say, the worst kind of leather, because there's different ways of producing and tanning leather, etc. But let's say you're replacing leather with a non-plastic alternative, which we have here, various ones, that are completely synthetic free. And some of them can now be produced on roll. So usually you would have had the shape of an animal, of course, of the hide that was used. But now with these new materials, they come on a roll. Not all of them, but some of them. And that gives you an enormous amount of new possibilities for design and much less waste, of course. And so that comes also with cost savings. That comes with new manufacturing potential. That has all sorts of opportunities that people often forget. So when we're talking about what we've just talked until now, it sounds sometimes quite, okay, we have to do this and it's a drag and it's, we have to get there because otherwise we're all going to die because of the climate crisis, which of course, unfortunately, is totally real. And we're here at London Climate Action Week, but also we need to see what business opportunities that brings, not just overall, but actually for the suppliers themselves and for the brands themselves. So yes, there's a huge problem with fashion still, but a lot of these fashion brands have also realized that there are real opportunities for them in here in reshaping the supply chain and reimagining the supply chain, sometimes incentivized with these new materials.
So I remember after I left university, my former girlfriend's flatmate started making shoes out of fish skin. That was a long time ago. And then where we are right now, our main studio is in just near the City of London. And we were shown in this studio where we are. They've got tables made out of waste coffee grinds, but also this amazing substance that looks like leather, or it might look like plastic, that's made out of the skin of the pomegranate. So, I mean, there's all kinds of things out there that can inspire people for even other curious ideas, which sounds fantastic. The question, I suppose, is when I look around this wonderful expo, at the moment, probably, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, most of the materials and fabrics we got here probably are a little bit more expensive than the mass-produced, because, of course, they don't factor in to the mass-produced ones or the damage they do to the environment. Right? If they did, then they'd be more expensive, right? But, I mean, I'm old enough to remember when it went from black and white TV to color TV, and everybody said, no, it'll never catch on, it's too expensive, right? Well, economies of scale kick in eventually if you get the big fashion houses coming behind it. So I'm not going to talk about price, and I think that that's a red herring, if I can put it that way, because it's about people buying into this idea. But there was one thing I wanted to ask you about. repair, is that a story in the textile business and the fashion business? Because I must say, I darn my socks when I'm watching football matches. And I see that next year in the European Union, there is a new right to repair directive coming into force, which is likely to include textiles in it. First, it's mainly kind of household goods like washing machines and things like that, with even discount vouchers for the public to actually go and get their things repaired. Is that important in this story or not?
Yeah, so of course it is. That's part of it. That's sort of at the very beginning. Before you go out and buy something new, think about, do you need it? Could you repair the one that you have already at home? Can you reinvent your wardrobe? Can you rethink and be creative with what you have? So all of that absolutely is along before we actually should even go into a shop, 100%. But I think when it comes to price, again, like you were saying, externalities are not factored in, therefore it's not a level playing field, it's very difficult. But also I think it depends, not just that, it depends what else do you take into account. So very often this thinking is still very much in silos and we're not connecting. And so when we're looking at, well, how much waste has that, for example, produced, that's not really factored in because that stuff sits in storage or in a waste or whatever. And that cost isn't really shown and part of the overall accounting. Exactly. So when we're talking about price, what are we actually really factoring in here? And therefore, it's not my favorite discussion just because you're comparing often pears and apples and that, yeah. So also, what time horizon are we really looking at? Yeah, anyway, do you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I don't think there's any debating on is it repair or this, right? It's repair and. So it's generally a hierarchy that one should look at. Like Nina said, do you even buy this? If it does get spoiled, do you repair it or do you reuse it? And then you come all the way down to recycle, which then goes into a lot of the innovations that you see today. But it's important to go down that hierarchy. And what we're doing here is really now looking at that, okay, well, if it has to go down to recycling and making new products, can we shift away from unsustainable virgin resources and move to something using the resources we already have? So that's really the conversation that we're looking at. And I think to your point on the price, it comes down to efficiencies. It comes down to economies of scale. And that's only going to happen when you have that seed of demonstration, you have the proof points. I think that's visible today. And it's now for the supply chain to co-create this with the brands to say, okay, how do we take this into product? And I think here the collaboration is so required and so intentional because what we've learned from some of the innovations is that you could ask for a material that's slightly different, and every brand and every designer can ask for something slightly different, but that means a whole new material. So can we come together and say, let's just start with a common basket of fibers, these newer fibers and newer fabrics, and make it easy for all of us to switch to these alternatives that are better for people and the planet. So yeah, that's what I'll say.
And of course, they all look absolutely stunning as well. So maybe we can fall in love again with clothes much more than some people have done in recent years and say, actually, this is something I want to hold on to because it might be just a touch more expensive, but it's so beautiful and I can keep it for a long time, right? That's important too. Any last points you want to make? What's in it for the farmers?
What's in it for the farmers? Well, what's in it for the farmers and what's in it for the urban people is that you're going to live in a world that isn't polluted, doesn't have climate change bearing down upon you, and where you can feel about your clothing that you're not somehow guilty although you look good. You actually want to integrate your values in what you wear, and that's going to be possible.
Well, I think if we haven't started already as a fashion brand to think about shifting our supply chains and making these changes, it's going to be quite costly to do that, because if you don't plan long term and you have to do short-term changes, that is always much more expensive, and you need to enter into these partnerships, like you said, you need to test this and you need to do all of that. And so I think if you haven't done that yet and you're not going to plan, that's a problem on one side. But also, as a fashion brand, do you actually have a license to operate. If we are facing the climate crisis where everything's hot, there's no more water, we need to use it for drinking rather than growing food, so irrigation's totally out of the question. So we need to have regenerative farming systems that are increasing water absorption, that are overall much more beneficial for farming communities, etc., in the global south, which is going to be hit hardest by the climate crisis. So unless you're a fashion brand who can actually play a positive role in shifting these negatives that we're all familiar with, then I don't think there's a point in doing fashion. But fashion can actually be a superpower and help people to imagine how a lifestyle could be that actually has a positive impact. That's where we need to get to. And how can we wear things that potentially, while it was grown, has sequestered carbon and has, increased the livelihoods of people in a place that we're not even familiar with, but we know how hard that's going to be for them. So unless I think you play an active role for a fashion brand, you're going to become very uncool. It's just not going to be relevant anymore because there's no point. It's totally against the, what should we call it, zeitgeist eventually.
Final comments. I think the best lessons that at least I've learned are from the mistakes that I've made. So I think here's an opportunity for us as we're reimagining, as Nina said, the fashion system. What have we learned that didn't go well with, say, just the cotton supply chain? How were farmers left behind? Can we not repeat those mistakes as we transition to these other materials or a decarbonized and circular future? How can we make sure that people are center and core to it and are actually inputting into the transition as we look to the future, a brighter future? So that's all I'd say.
Well, thank you. There's a lot more to say, as we all know, but we're called We Time, so that probably explains why we have to wrap up right now. But it's been very fascinating. The expo looks absolutely tremendous. I'm going to have a little more of a stroll around after this to absorb some of this wonderful creativity that's 3,200 square meters, and I actually have a slightly fractured toe, so I won't be covering the entire expo, but I will certainly have a look at it. And well done, Nina, for doing this. And I mean, obviously, you want to put yourself out of business, really. You want to see that sometime in the next 14 years, you don't have to do this because it's mainstream.
100%. I'm still surprised I'm here, actually. But unfortunately, the pollution is increasing and not decreasing, so we might be here for a while.
We're glad she is here.
And fabulous team behind, and supporters and partners like that makes it happen.
Well, just remember, sometimes when you're pushing a rock up a mountain, you don't know where the top is, but when it hits the top, it runs down the other side very quickly. So thank you very much indeed. That's great.
Thank you.
So I have another wonderful guest with me here at London Climate Action Week. You've been watching a film called The Letter, which is about Pope Francis meeting people from different continents a few years ago and talking about the environment and climate change. Was it a good film?
Amazing. I have to say, I am completely blown away by it. It's the third time I see the film. I have shown it to friends, I've shown it to family in the meantime. And for me, it carries a deep, deep message. The message being that we as humanity have to come together to solve the crisis we're currently in.
So tell me who you are and why did you get involved in this film? Because we chatted a little bit earlier and you played a part in actually getting some funding together for this.
I was approached by another friend during lockdown who said that there was a film team who wanted to make a film about the encyclical that Pope Francis had written about the environment and how we are all stewards of the environment. And that the film was sadly running out of funding because of COVID and the complexities that the lockdown had brought. Now,
it's okay. It's just a very loud emergency ambulance that's just gone straight past.
Symbolizes really very beautifully the emergency we are in. We all know, and I know your viewers know, we are in an environmental crisis, and I would say an emergency. A breakdown, essentially, of our ecosystems. And for us, it was a really great opportunity to put a bit of money into a film that was put together to be reached, to reach really wide audiences around the world. And that would not just be a Catholic film and to a Catholic audience, but instead Pope Francis really used this as an opportunity to reach out to other faiths and faith leaders also, to bring together humanity around a common project.
can the faiths writ large, and so we're not just talking Catholicism here, we can talk Protestantism, we can talk Buddhism, we can talk the Orthodox Church, I mean, lots of them out there. I mean, they've been sort of partners to a greater or lesser extent over the years with the UN climate process. I mean, there were many in Paris and well before that. I remember, was it Bartholomew of the Orthodox Church?
Yes,
he was
exactly.
very active at one time. Yeah. But you wonder how deep it goes within the fabric of the religious organizations. I mean, Pope Francis was quite special with that letter. For example, do we know what the new Pope's thinking about this topic?
We know that he supports it. He met with the executive director of the Laudato Si movement within the first weeks of his tenure. I think that the care for the environment sits really at the heart of all faiths and all religious communities. I think faith touches on all aspects of our humanity, not just single topics. We understand that the earth is a common home in which we live and which we all share. And I think this is a huge opportunity also for other faith leaders to step in, to set their differences aside, because we see that the world is currently struggling, and certain nations and leaders are struggling to actually see the communalities between people. What they're focusing on is the differences between people. We want to now focus on the communalities, to together rally as humanity, as a team that we can be, to really solve the challenges that are on our hands.
And do you sometimes get, I mean, you're a family investment fund.
Want to put some money.
I see, yeah.
Sort of what makes more sense, Put the money on a savings account or invest it in a holiday, or do we save that money and invest it in environmental charity work and environmental communications? And we decided for children's future. Our children are only 10 and 15 at the moment, but we worry greatly about their future and care greatly for their future. It would make much more sense to invest any money that we could invest into environmental work and charity work.
So, we have a campaign called Move the Money, which is trying to persuade people to move the money from some of the big banks that seem to talk through both sides of their mouths. One moment, oh yes, we're very green and we're investing. Next moment, they're investing in the oil and gas industry. To all those 25, 26, 27 plus banks in the world, they're just normal banks, except they just don't invest in fossil fuels. Yeah. And it's quite interesting when you tell people, well, you don't have to invest in Deutsche Bank or this other bank that's doing this. There are actually banks out there that you can invest in that actually don't invest in fossil fuels. Is that, I don't know, does that kind of match your sense of how we should do things?
Absolutely. I mean, this is one of the, what happens with the money. Money works for us, and it either works in our interest or against our interest. And sadly, if we give the money to most of the large banks around the world, they will give it straight to fossil fuel companies that invested in further fossil fuel exploration that further ruins our world, or deforestation, for example. So what we have to do with our pension money and our investment money is to absolutely reinvest it and to give it to people who will consider themselves stewards of the environment in the same way as we do, who care.
Thank you very much indeed.
Nice to meet you, Nick. Thank you.
So we have another wonderful guest here at London Climate Action Week. He's very much involved in a film that was being screened this evening in Notting Hill Gate, which is about Pope Francis, Laudato Si, which was this great letter that he produced on the environment and climate change. And you've made a film about him. Could you say first who you are and who you're representing?
Okay, my name is Nicolas Brown. I'm representing, the film company was called Off the Fence, but we work very closely with the Laudato Si movement and the Vatican, although they didn't fund any of it. The film was basically the letter, A Message to Our Earth, is about Pope Francis's now legacy, sadly, because he's passed. And yeah, do you want me to talk about why I made it?
Yeah, why did you make it? Yeah, what inspired you to do it?
Yeah, I myself am not a Catholic. I'm a science filmmaker, but I feel like the Catholic message, I feel like the climate message is so urgent that when I was approached by the Catholic Church to talk about making this film, I immediately jumped at the opportunity because I normally make films, with David Attenborough or in sort of more commercial arenas, and this was an opportunity to speak to a different group of people. I think what I felt like when I heard about Laudato Si and the Catholic climate movement, which is, there's 1.2 billion Catholics. The fact that they're interested in climate change, for me, felt like that moment in the Lord of the Rings when, you're getting beaten and then another army comes over the hill to help you. And it felt like such a welcome new group of people who feel it in their hearts that something needs to be done, and they're listening to the science. And Pope Francis himself was a chemist, and he even mentions in the film the partnership with science. So I felt like this is the time is now that science and religion work together to combat climate change.
I wonder what Pope Francis would be thinking right now about the current American administration almost cancelling science. Climate change disappearing off United States government websites, NASA and NOAA under attack, universities being attacked by the vice president, the professors, we have to get them. It's quite a thing. Standing here in Europe and watching it, don't worry, we have our populist parties too, right, who are a bit kind of nervous about climate change, but not this assiduous attack on science generally and climate science perhaps in particular.
Well, I'm from Boulder, where Noah is from, and I feel it deeply. And my friends, my family, we all know exactly what you're talking about. I think the interesting thing, in terms of Pope Francis is, it's hard for me to say what went on in the conclave after Pope Francis died, but I actually don't think it's an accident that there is an American Pope who actually speaks way more. There were many cardinals from America who could have been made Pope. The one they chose, I think, really reads from Pope Francis's hymn book of compassion and climate action. So I think there was possibly a deliberate choice there that the Catholic community was sending a certain message to certain leaders. I don't want to make it into too much of a political appointment, because obviously it's not. But the attack on compassion is being resisted, I think, in that way, that we have I think a new Pope who hopefully will continue Pope Francis's legacy. Let's see.
Because they have a pontifical science...
Academy of Sciences, yeah. Say that again? The Pontifical Academy of Sciences, which descends from Galileo's time when they imprisoned him, but yeah.
So, we need, with 1.6 billion people out there, many, of course, in the United States as well, it would be good if this Pope, we don't know what he's going to do yet, specifically on the agenda of climate change, but the people I've been speaking to get the sense that maybe he's going to take forward that same stance on some of these issues as Pope Francis, and that would be very welcome, I presume, at this time, particularly in the United States, but in other parts of the world where there are some populist politicians making noises about, cancelling climate, so as if it's not existing at all, right? So.
Well, I think what you see with Pope Francis's legacy, and in part the film, it doesn't touch on that directly, but if you watch the film, you'll see the more kind of, I suppose, the journey. But what Pope Francis has left us now in terms of a legacy is indoctrinated into the church. It is church policy now. His writings, his teachings, his social teachings on care for creation, those things are something that all Catholics now feel or are made aware of. And like everything else, whether it's in the science sphere, I think the message of my film in particular is that we're not alone, but we have to work together. And it's not up to one pope or famous person to lead the way. The real message is, we all have to put our big boy pants on and get together. And I think that's what we're feeling now in Europe. Europe is now making this determination. We need to make a determination as people of Europe and people of America, wherever you are, actually, to go it alone if we have to, in terms of the political. If our politicians aren't going to be leading, we have to make it safe for them to lead. So we need to rise up. And I think, COP in Belém, that's a big thing that Mary Robinson spoke about tonight. There are opportunities for us to focus ourselves and not lose hope. I mean, I think that's the other big message.
You can just see the graphs though. Renewable energy doubling every 2.5 years. Electrification of transportation, cars now reaching exponential growth. Battery storage and this sort of thing. All those curves mean that one big industry out there is facing maybe a slightly rough future going forward, and thank God, because that's the industry that's actually making climate change happen. So maybe we're pushing a rock up a hill and we just don't realize we're not that far from the summit. So maybe we can take that view.
Yeah, well, let's get our subsidies back. They're ours. That's our money. The subsidies, I don't know the exact figures. I was with Al Gore recently, but he basically said the amount of subsidies we're paying now to the fossil fuel industry is coincidentally the exact amount of subsidies that we need to make the energy transition. So if we make it safe for our leaders to lead, then they will lead. But that requires, I think, all of us. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed for your time, and well done for your film.
Thank you. I appreciate it. You can see it on YouTube, but we will be showing it in cinemas now throughout the UK at least, and it's in a lot of churches as well.
And the title of the film is?
It's called The Letter, A Message to Our Earth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
So, another wonderful guest who's been seeing this film called The Letter, which is about Pope Francis, screened here at the Electric Cinema in Notting Hill Gate as part of London Climate Action Week. If you could say who you are and who you represent.
I'm Nisha Owen, and I'm the UK Executive Director of Global Greengrants Fund.
Wonderful. And what does Global Greengrants Fund do?
So we are a grant maker. We support environmental justice and climate justice grassroots movements across the global majority world.
So what was your interest in this film? I mean, it's a film about Pope Francis. It's a film about Pope Francis and the Laudato Si, which was this letter, in a sense, on the environment, which captured a lot of attention when it happened. What was your interest in this?
So I think that the description of Laudato Si as Pope Francis' love letter to the earth is really powerful, because it's not just a message for those of the Catholic faith. It speaks to all faiths and those of none, and it really tells us that we need to be working together in unity to tackle the climate crisis, the environmental crisis, all of the social injustice challenges that we see today as a consequence of that. And so I was invited to moderate the panel discussion and bring a little bit of a perspective from kind of the interconnectedness of the climate crisis, as well as the importance of intersectionality and the inequality that we see as a result.
So the next UN Climate Conference is in Belém in Brazil. I had the pleasure of interviewing Anna Tony last week in Bonn, and that'll be broadcast, I think, on Wednesday, where I asked her, why the devil just before a COP are you going after 172 new drilling sites in the ocean off Brazil, including in the Amazon waters? And she told me that, well, you know, there are some people that produce oil and there's some people that consume oil. Until we get a balance between that, it's always going to be a bit of a headache. I'm really paraphrasing her. She was very politically astute with the answer. Do you think these big COPs really make any difference anymore? You're doing grassroots work. London Climate Action Week is bringing people together without flying them all over the world. Do you think we're entering a new era? Because some might say the Paris Agreement was a great landmark thing to achieve. I was even the spokesperson for the Paris Agreement, so I loved it, of course. But you get to the sense that maybe it's no longer about big meetings. You know, it's about implementation of everything that's been agreed. What's your view?
So that's a challenging question. There are a lot of problems with the COPs, but one of the issues is that at the moment they're our only kind of political mechanism for these kind of global multilateral agreements. What is more important is actually participation of grassroots movements and grassroots communities. And so one of the things that we do is we support our network to be able to participate, to effectively engage, to meet with their delegations, to promote their agendas. And those are things like resisting those oil drilling sites that you were talking about. We support a lot of communities who are resisting fossil fuels, extractives, and many others that are directly threatening their natural resources. And as we know, indigenous peoples, Afro-descendants, local communities are some of the best stewards and guardians of nature that we have remaining.
Okay, good point. And there's a lot of debate about whether the COP should be happening or not happening. There is a bit of a split view around the world. Maybe they still have value, maybe they don't, but whatever happens is we all need to come together, right, on this challenge. And maybe we're pushing a big rock up a hill and we haven't quite seen that we might not be far from the summit and it might just run down the other side. So we need another Paris moment for sure, but maybe there's a lot going on that sometimes is invisible to the average man and woman. I'm remain optimistic.
Yes, absolutely. People care, and they care very deeply. And what we need to do is really really uplift the voices of these grassroots movements, these communities, which could be everybody here in the UK, everyone overseas, to say this is not what we want. This is not the future that we imagine for ourselves, and we want to change what's happening, and we want to resist. And we need our governments to listen to us and take action, so that we're not leaving a disaster for the young people of today, but actually a future that they want to inherit.
Maybe we don't need to just move the money campaign, but move the head of state campaign, you know, on a rotating basis. Yeah.
Indeed.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for being with us. So we've got a wonderful guest here with us at London Climate Action Week, and there's been a wonderful film just screened here in Notting Hill Gate. Could you say who you are and where you're from?
I'm Lorna Gold, and I am from Ireland. I represent the Laudato Si movement.
And the Laudato Si movement is what?
The Laudato Si movement is a global people's movement that was started by Pope Francis as a result of his letter that he wrote called Laudato Si, which means praise be, but it's actually a letter about the environment. So he calls for climate action, so that's why we exist.
And I do remember the letter, and it was very well received and got a lot of attention, garnered a lot of attention. How do you feel its success has been in the intervening years?
It's been an extraordinary success. I think it's one of the stories that's not really told widely. I think sometimes the news can focus in on a lot of negative stuff, but Laudato Si has been like a forest growing in silence. We have a movement which is spread right across the world. We're in 140 countries. We have trained 40,000 local leaders who now instigate climate action projects in their local communities. And we're doing a lot of advocacy work around ending fossil fuels, engaging with the climate movement. And then we're also really engaged at the Vatican level, engaged with various Vatican processes. We manage a sustainability platform on behalf of the Vatican, which aims to have full sustainability for all Catholic institutions. At the moment, we have 5,000 institutions on the pathway to sustainability, and we're working to increase that number significantly in the coming years.
And how do you connect with the other faiths?
We work a lot in collaboration with all faiths. We work with multi-faith platforms, and we work with the UN Faith for Earth. And we especially come together when we're advocating, for example, for the COP process, but also at national levels, because it's really important that faith communities find their voice on this topic. One of the things that Pope Francis really spoke to was the need for an ethical, a moral approach to climate change. Yes, we need technological solutions, they're essential, but we also need to raise our voices and to recognise the human and the moral responsibility to take action.
The film that you just watched here at the Electric Cinema here in Notting Hill Gate, specially shown as part of London Climate Action Week. It was Pope Francis with people visiting him, in a sense, from different parts, different continents. Was it well received?
It was very well received. We were very happy. This film was made, really took a number of years during COVID, and it was really a story about Pope Francis's environmental message. Not really so much him as a Catholic leader, but him as a global leader speaking to the whole world. And this was reporting on a dialogue, capturing an intimate dialogue that he had in a couple of years ago now with people from different faiths, different walks of life, who got the chance to come together at the invitation of the Pope. And I was lucky enough to be part of that and to be helping to welcome and to work with the people from the different communities together.
So what about the new Pope? Are we expecting the same energy on environmental climate issues as Pope Francis? Have we had any hints of an interest in this topic from the new Pope?
We certainly have. He's got off to a really good start, I would say. Obviously, this year is 10 years since Pope Francis launched Laudato Si, and on the 10th anniversary, he spoke about Laudato Si. I also had an opportunity already to meet with him to discuss what our movement is doing, and we are really hopeful that he gets it. He worked most of his life in Peru, and he understands the way that this connects with the needs of people living in poverty, with indigenous communities. And in fact, when I met him in Rome, we prepared a scrapbook for him of our movement and how it's growing all over the world. And I showed him a page which showed a picture of him with our movement in 2015 on a climate march. So I actually got a laugh out of the Pope because I think everybody's been dredging up pictures that he publicised on X, on Twitter. So I'm really hopeful. He has that Latin American kind of energy. I think he'll be a different tone of voice to Pope Francis. He has to find his own tone of voice. I think he wants to to not so much to be maybe what we came to expect of Pope Francis, who was very much had a sense of speaking off the cuff and whatever. But Pope Leo, I think, will find his voice, and his focus on uniting people is really important at this moment, in helping us to see, certainly in the Catholic world, that this issue isn't for a certain sector of the church. I think some people thought that this was just for a certain kind of group in the church, but this is for everybody. That's really important, I think.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Let's hope this Pope is going to take an active role in the next UN Climate Conference, COP30 in Brazil, in Latin America, and best of luck with your work.
Thank you. Thank you.